We looked at part 1, if you haven't seen it, it's the first link in the description. But here's part 2 of the greatest against all odds stories, made up of players that used to play in the NBA, along with one current player because his story was just too good to pass up on. And let's start with him first, in Ben McLemore. Today we know Ben as a player who, coming out of Kansas, was compared to Ray Allen and said to have been the most athletic player in the 2013 NBA draft. So with that and him getting drafted 7th overall by the Kings, everyone had high hopes for him, but it's safe to say he's never lived up to those expectations and is now a role player on the Houston Rockets. But when you hear his story and how he made it to even just being a role player in the NBA, you'll have a whole new respect for him. It started in one of the smallest towns in one of the poorest areas of Missouri, where Ben was the second youngest of 6 children. He grew up in a house that was 600 square feet and said that on any given night, as many as 10 relatives would be sleeping in that house. All of his family had jobs, but they were never enough. And they really weren't, because he has memories of waking up with no food in the fridge and then not eating for at least 1 or 2 days at a time. And that led to him looking forward to going to school so he could always get a free meal. Then if his family couldn't keep on the hot water, he would have to microwave bowls of water until he filled his bathtub so he could at least have a warm bath. Or if their electricity got turned off, they would have to light the house with candles and turn on the gas-powered stove to stay warm. So there's no denying that Ben McLemore was about as poor and as close to being homeless as someone could get, and it made him vow to get his family out of this situation. So he hit the gym every single day of his life. But during that, when he was 15, his older brother who he looked up to got sent to jail on a 15-year sentence, which he'll be getting out of in 2023. And he said the day they took him away was worse than any of the days he had no electricity, water, or food, because he knew he would eventually get all of those things, but didn't know if he would ever get his brother back. And it still haunts him to this day. But also that day, Ben knew that it meant he had to become the man of the house. And just like everything though, basketball got him through it. And he played all 4 years of high school. In his first 3 though, they were honestly nothing too great. But his senior season was a surprise for everybody and got him ranked as the top 15 small forward in the country. So he ended up getting recruited by Kansas. And in his 1 season there, he outworked everyone in and out of the gym. He would stay 3 hours after class every day to continue studying and would always be the last one in the gym, never forgetting his need to help his mom or forgetting to read letters coming in from his brother. He then averaged 16 points a game at Kansas on 42% from 3, while like I said at the time being the best pure athlete in the draft. And as I mentioned, that got him taken 7th overall in the NBA draft against all odds. Then we have Caron Butler, whose story's even more wild because he started his life off to a terrible start. He was born without a father, and when he was young, some of his uncles and cousins were already dealing on the streets. And in a poor family, Caron fell into it too, making his first deal at 11 years old, and bought his first gun at 12 years old. And he continued on this path so much so that by the time he was 15 years old, he had already been arrested 15 times. And at this rate, with the path he was on, it really looked like all hope was lost for him and that he wasn't ever gonna make it out of this bad neighborhood. But things got worse. During his freshman year of high school, police raided his locker and found his so he got sentenced to over a year in prison, and it was there that he truly found his love for the game of basketball. He had always played for fun and been better than all the kids he grew up with, but didn't get his real passion for the game until this 1 year in prison. And during that same time, he said that seeing his mom come visit him really made him realize that he was a nobody and wasn't doing things right. So when he got out, he was ready to turn his life around. And he was still young enough to finish high school, so he enrolled, got a job at Burger King, and tried his best to stay out of trouble. Then a couple months went by, and after doing everything right, his life was almost ruined. Police raided his house, found an illegal substance, and Caron's life flashed before his eyes. But having seen the change in Butler over the past couple of months, the police captain didn't believe that they were his, so he made a call and let Caron off the hook. And if the captain hadn't have done that, Butler's life would have been completely different because he would have been jailed for 10 to 15 years. And he said that day was probably the biggest turning point in his entire life. So he joined the basketball team at school as a junior, which was the first time he had ever played organized basketball, and he instantly became one of the state's best overall players. He was so naturally gifted that it made up for his extremely late start to the game, and his tough work ethic was what was able to put him over the top. So so he switched schools as a senior, continued to dominate, and even with his past was able to secure a scholarship to the University of Connecticut. And as a freshman, he led the team in both scoring and rebounding, played even better the next year averaging 20 and 7, and led his team to an Elite 8 appearance, before declaring for the NBA draft, and getting selected 10th overall by the Miami Heat. The man started basketball in his junior year, and after just 5 seasons of playing, just like that he was in the NBA, when things could have gone very different for him. And speaking of very different, Luol Deng had a very different upbringing and against all odds story compared to the other guys in this video. He was born in what's now South Sudan, and when he was just 4 years old, his mother and father stayed behind and sent Deng and his 8 siblings to Egypt to escape an ongoing war. And he stayed there for 5 years, where himself and his older brother actually met Manute Bol, who mentored them, acted as a father, and taught them the game of basketball. Then eventually though, 5 years later, the 9 of them moved to South London, where they reunited with their parents. And it was a huge culture shock for Luol, going from Egypt to Britain, especially since he didn't even speak English at the time, but he eventually learned it and adapted and really got into playing soccer, which was by far his favorite sport. But as he kept growing taller at a young age, he realized he should probably be playing basketball. So he made the switch and joined a tournament at 13 years old, where he averaged 40 points and 14 rebounds a game, and another tournament where he averaged 34 points. He was so good that he actually attracted the attention of a scout who offered him a high school scholarship in New Jersey at 14 years old. So he took it and his entire family moved for the 4th time to America. At this point he was tired of moving and he missed his home, but he knew he had been given such a huge opportunity and was going to work harder than everyone to prove that he deserved it. And he did just that, because by the time he was a senior in high school, he was widely known as the 2nd most promising senior in the country, only behind LeBron James. He was easily a 5-star recruit and got a scholarship at Duke, where he averaged 15 points a game, led his team to the 2004 Final Four, and led all freshmen in scoring, rebounding, and field goal percentage that year. So he was taken 7th overall in the 2004 NBA draft by the Suns, then traded right away to the Chicago Bulls. The man went from running away from his country, living in Egypt, getting trained by Manute Bol, moving to Britain, then America, all by the time he was 14, but through his natural size and ability, was still able to make it in the NBA. Then we have Allen Iverson, who was born in 1975 in a bad neighborhood in Hampton, Virginia. And to make it worse, his mother Ann Iverson was single and 15 years old at the time, so it was a rough start from the beginning for him. At an early age though, to keep him away from the wrong crowds, AI's mom got him into football and he fell in love with it instantly. Then a man named Michael Freeman came along and became like a father figure to Allen, and saw he was a great young athlete, so started getting him into basketball when he turned 9. So by then he had football and basketball to keep him busy and out of trouble. Then fast forward 2 more years, and at 15 years old, Iverson was the starting quarterback and point guard for his school. Everyone knew he was his high school's best all-around athlete and one of the top basketball and football players that they had. And by his junior year, he led both his school's basketball and football team to state championships. And scouts from both sports were looking at AI at this point. That was until February 14th, 1993, where by this time Iverson was 17 years old and at a bowling alley with a group of his friends, when an argument with a group of white teens started and turned into an actual fight where Allen Iverson threw a chair and hit a girl in the head. So himself and 2 of his friends were arrested, and they said he could face up to 60 years in prison, but instead gave him a 15-year sentence at 17 years old. So here he was, a standout athlete, surely headed to play professionally, but thinking he was going to be in jail until he was in his 30s. Fortunately for him though, after just 4 months in jail, his case was overturned. And when he got out, Georgetown saw past his case and still offered him a full scholarship onto the team, where he immediately made an impact, and after 2 seasons of college, entered the NBA draft and went 1st overall to the Philadelphia 76ers in 1996. And it's interesting because Allen Iverson said that if he had not got arrested, he was gonna go play football at Notre Dame. So if it wasn't for that, we would have never seen him on an NBA court. Then finally we have Larry Bird. Larry grew up in a very small town, and it said that his family was always extremely poor growing up, and it's something that still motivates him to this day. His mother had to work 2 jobs to support her husband, who was a war veteran, along with Larry and his 5 siblings. So for him personally, he had to work multiple jobs to earn anything that he ever wanted in life, and he would just use basketball to get away from all of his problems. He wasn't always a great player though, because that didn't come until his last 2 years of high school. As a sophomore, he was 6'1" and playing on the junior varsity team, but by the next next year he had grown to 6'3" and started to stand out as what one coach called the greatest passer he had ever seen. So life was getting better for him on the court, but off of it his parents couldn't handle their problems anymore and got divorced. But then by his senior season he grew to be 6'7" and started to gain national attention, where he then averaged 30 points and 20 rebounds a game, and he ended up accepting a scholarship to Indiana University, but dropping out a week after getting there because he said the school was way too big for him and had only picked it because he let too many people pressure him and influence his decision. So he went back home and his mother was the most disappointed in him because at this time he said that the thought of playing in the NBA had never even crossed his mind as a possibility and that he was only going to college to be the first in his family to get a degree. But so eventually he joined a junior college and started working as a garbage man for an entire year. And can you imagine that? NBA legend Larry Bird at 19 years old had just dropped out of college, never dreamed of playing in the NBA, and was a garbage man. And like I said, that lasted about a year. Then he was able to transfer to Indiana State, the college that he originally wanted to join. But as this was a step in the right direction, Larry Bird's father took his own life on February 3rd, 1975. And that played a huge part in Bird's life, and it made him want to make something of himself that much more. So he went out and dominated at Indiana State. 30-13 his 3 years there, including going 33-0 one year, leading his team to the 1979 NCAA title game, where he had his first face-off with Magic Johnson, and what was the highest ever television rating for a college basketball game. Bird lost the game, but would still be drafted 6th overall in the NBA draft. And it's crazy to see how far things really turned around for him in just a couple of years. But that's gonna wrap up part 2. If you enjoyed the video, comment down below and let me know. And also comment any future video ideas you might want to see. Don't forget to drop a like, subscribe, and I'll catch you next video.